Overlay.
No, I like it, but I want to make sure it's.
Printer.
Exactly.
So I'm trying to figure some of those out. Yes.
But you're right. You get the old one, and then you look at the.
It's actually quite common. It's smaller areas.
Yes.
I would only need one section.
Here's the real issue. It's when you sell it. You don't have a background. So that's where you.
That's what I'm saying. Why would that be different? Say now, I we're spending all year to rob the back.
But I just gotta make sure it's right.
Oh, hey, let's do that.
That's why.
So you gotta hit this little. I get two habits. I always want to touch. I know, it's not touch screen. I figured that out. Okay, good to go. Thank you. Hi, Chris.
I said we need it.
Oh, I know.
Oh, no, I don't have. You're too far over. I
turned away.
I know. We're not gonna put you out there. No. You're too old.
Yeah, whatever.
I'm alone like that. I know.
You gotta pick your line.
That'll do it. Trouble, right? For the chat row on.
And then there's red house for sale now. On field. Yeah.
Just say, he's a smart person. Thank you for coming. Don't laugh. No, it's just this one I asked. No, it was, this was mine. We cut and pasted it. I just wanted to ask the question when we should. So I'm gonna say that was just a personal note. She cut and pasted it. So I'm gonna ask you.
So this is a new agenda.
Yes.
Vice President.
Well.
There we go.
Everything back again. be the last time either. Oh, it's already done. We're doing it in July.
It was not frost on the.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And it's sometimes.
It was like this.
Like in the air.
Yeah, yeah. But it was still waiting.
Okay, so are we recording?
Yes.
So Apple says-
Oh, yeah.
Initial it.
Or they forget.
Good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. If you could join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Mr. Mayor, are you
Sure.
serving as our
Yes, I am.
secretary tonight? You can go ahead and call the roll.
Mrs. Casey,
Here?
Mr. Shaboo.
Here.
Mr. Sweeney.
Here.
Mr. Moore.
Here.
Mr. Busher.
Here.
Somebody else is here too. That's great. Love that, right? We're going to look through the approval of the minutes. I had one request to what was contained in the minutes on page 2 under development plans. I think when we cut and pasted from my notes, we included my note, which was a question that is in here. I'm going to ask that we strike that. You'll see that it just kind of says, if council's to be involved, it should be expanded, and I said expanded to say what? That was my own personal note. I had the question answered. So I'm going to ask that we go ahead and strike that. Beyond that, I don't think I saw any changes. I don't know if anybody else had any afterwards. If not, I'll take a motion to approve with that one line struck.
Motion so made.
Thank you. And if you could call the roll for us,
Sure.
Mr. Mayor.
Mrs. Casey,
Aye.
Mr. Shaboo.
Aye.
Mr. Sweeney.
Aye.
Mr. Moore.
Aye.
Mr. Busher.
Right, we're going to go ahead and do the public portion of our meeting. We're going to actually pull forward from our agenda the Mario's Lakeway Lounge request. Usually when we have just from an administrative perspective, any of these applications, we'd like to have those up front. And so that's what we'll first be discussing. And
Yes. Mario, come on up, please.
come on up, tell us what you're looking at. I know we have a bigger drawing here for those of you who may like me, tried to print it, it was not printed. This is a request for a pavilion.
I want to just stand like what I do,
Sure.
side on the bar, and I like to stand a little bit longer. Same. Right.
Well,
Okay.
explain what we have here, please.
So what you're looking at here then, this is your
Yes.
existing building, and there's a patio here or something,
Yes,
correct? That's
patio
a
here.
little fenced in.
And this is, I want to stand this. longer like it was here.
Okay. So it's noted here as a pavilion that's 40 by 28.
Yes.
With, yes, with 16, 15 feet.
It's in a 15 feet height.
Okay, between that and the property line, and then would be on the line to the south.
I think I do this, what, 2 years ago, right? I did this. Sometimes smoke, now we complain if you see the outside, everybody outside, and you say, oh, it's smoky. After more people, just more people.
Right. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes,
The only thing that I see wrong with it is that our ordinance 1258, 3, 125805, 3C says that when a commercial butts up to residential, you have to have 30-foot rear edge.
From my other property,
Doesn't matter if you own it or not, it's got to be 30 foot from the property line. So the 15-foot or 16-foot would not make.
I think there, you own behind,
yes, sir.
you could sell either parcel. Even though you accommodate both parcels. Whoever purchased either. Length of drive.
You know, it's, if I go to, put it in the, front center parking lot, I don't want to do it. Space. And go, from the far. Here, just extend it a little bit longer.
I think I think there's a couple of pieces. One is we can't go beyond what's written in the law. So we would have a difficult time here, especially given that it is more than a minor variance that we're looking at. I think the other question that I have is that usually with the site plan, we do like to also see parking. What I can't tell here is, there are a minimum number of parking spaces that would be required for a business. It's hard to tell here as there, again, I can't tell that from the drawing.
Okay.
Do you have sufficient parking for what the city ordinance would require? And then how many spaces, do we remove as a result of that? So it's just a little bit of a question for me. Anybody else have any questions?
What's the current setback? What is the current distance between the end of that existing pavilion to the line?
Well, it's 28 plus 15,
Oh, okay, so.
or no, 40 plus 15. It's 28 wide. So it's 55.
I think we here, there probably 6, maybe for something a little longer, because I put it here already blacked out because it was, next week. I don't want. I was thinking about the back side.
Yes.
From the existing from the existing building to the back lot line would be 55 feet. And the proposal is a 40-foot structure.
So parking aside, the parking question, which is a valid question. That aside, there's no reason you could not do an addition and meet the 30-foot.
It would be a smaller addition. Correct.
Smaller addition. The other thing you noted was people get upset they can't smoke. So 15 feet, you've got significant, that'd be open covered, open patio.
It's open, yeah.
Yeah.
This one it will be open.
So now you got potential cigarette smoke wafting into the residential yard, which might be objectionable. So certainly an addition could be had, saving for the parking question. And you could meet the 30-foot setback.
Well, what you are saying,
If-
let me
yeah.
clarify there. What you're saying is that instead of a 40-foot, you have to chop another 15 feet off of it. So it would be a 25-foot, 25 by 28. A 25 by 28.
I think that I have it, there's no parking here. So this is parking over this. This is my house
Okay.
here. And my property over
Mhm.
this, this is, we have from house.
It's not from the
You better
house,
go-
it's from the
I know.
lot line.
That's a line over there. I think that we have about maybe we have a 20 foot from the line.
Okay,
I'm
again,
sure,
that,
maybe a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Because
So-
it's a bigger, I know I should take a size, you know, take a. See exactly what size I have there. The reason why I make it because it's nice and very, you know, just make it stand there, just plenty of parking.
You pretty much want this for a smoker, right?
The smokers, maybe, I'm gonna try move much I can, you know, little make it bigger.
so it isn't the type of.
You know what, nobody wanna be inside the bar, I'll be honest with you, mostly everybody wanna sit outside. For some time, you know.
Yeah, so
If I
it isn't
lose
the
it-
type of building that's the problem. That's terrific, and for whatever the appropriate, so long as it's within the Ohio Revised Code, that's fine with us. The concern is that 15 feet. So what we would need to see is drawings that would show it's a 25 by 28 foot as opposed to 40 by 28. That would provide us with 30 feet from the back. And I think that's the piece that we're looking for.
And it doesn't cut off any.
And then the question
No, we
is,
don't
do
have the
you,
park.
do you have, do we
Adequate
have
parking.
adequate parking? Would also need to be part of, whoever did this nice drawing. As well.
Your lot isn't striped, is it? For parking, is it striped?
Those lines?
Yeah.
I don't make it that white, but the yellow. I buy last year, the yellow, I want to black it because this guy who put it there black top. And I had a water, so that says come back, another come back, and I left it. Well, I'll take care of that. You know, same thing with, it's my fault machine, but I have a hard time. I really
got you.
appreciate it.
Sure.
I don't want something, if you know, like that. You know.
Yeah, so I think that there's a couple of things. I think the other thing, which I don't know if we have looked at, is before we approve a new permit, we've also had a rule that went in. I don't remember whether it was last year, I think it was about a year ago. You must be up to date with all of the outstanding ordinances, and one of them does have to do with the parking lot. So we want to look at that, make sure that it's striped and there's enough
No problem.
spots.
I have a gallon story that last year,
Okay,
I put a new.
good,
parking lot,
okay,
you know.
then that won't be a problem. What I would recommend, though, is that we table this. Well, we have two choices here, okay? We can either go ahead and take a vote tonight on what you have presented here. I will tell you it would likely not be approved. It would have to go to the Board of Zone of Appeals and they would have to take a look at it.
Okay.
The other option is we could table this and instead next month look at a corrected version, modified version that would show us that the lot is good, the parking is good, and that this is actually going to be 30 feet. So again, instead of 40 feet, it would be 25, be a little more of a square than a rectangle.
I mean, I have to cut from this one to around here, right? Again.
No, you don't have to cut from this one. I mean, if you keep this building as is, you do whatever you want, but it needs to be 30 feet in. from the
Oh, you
back.
want to make it shorter?
Yeah, it's got to be, instead of 15 feet, it have to be twice that, so whatever the visual is. We've got to be 30 feet from the back line. And then again, the alternative kind of is if you don't want to do that, we could go to the Board of Zone of Appeals and see if they would feel different.
We can make it best we can.
I think the other piece is if we table it, we don't charge. Correct. We don't charge. any
If you
permit
charge,
fee.
if you charge, doesn't matter.
Yeah, it does.
It's
Every little
only I
bit
want
helps.
this because I got a grandbabies.
Ah,
And my
Very
son
good.
one die at 8 years old. He's always
Ah.
he cut grass. That's why I was late, so.
well, yeah, I hear you. So you got a little one. 10 by 20. Currently, yeah.
Want to show this?
Yes.
We want to show the parking spaces being 10 by 20.
Well, I was thinking the owner, I'm not gonna deal with the lady, and she got my money. It's good fight.
Okay, so I would recommend then that we go ahead and we're gonna table this. We'll put it on hold for a month. We're gonna ask that you reconsider so that we've got 30 feet from the back line. And then if you could also add to the drawing, just the number of parking spaces, so we can be sure that that's in compliance. And again, we have to have it before we could issue the permit. We would have to be able to have the city validate that it has been struck.
Hey, you guys, boss, not me.
Okay, thank you,
I
sir.
like do that, make it, a little bit looks better,
Yeah.
and straight.
Do we know the number of parking spaces for this?
We do not, there's a lot of connections on.
Not based on the drawing.
Not based on the drawing, we don't know that. That's, I think, why we're asking for a clarified drawing that would show us the compliant spaces in that 10 by 20. 20 long, 10 wide, so,
It's 21.
right?
It's not really expensive. 3, 4, 5, $60.
That's back up. Thank you.
Okay, and just to make the note so that it hits our minutes as well, chapter 1280 is the one that talks about the parking requirement. So that'll kind of have those in there for your person who did this great drawing. Yeah, it's for the conditional use permit. So I think what we'll do then is if I could request of the city to perhaps issue Mr. Pasek a list of those ordinances. It would include the parking and then our fencing and vegetation ordinances as well.
Yep.
So that he's got everything written out there. And then when you consider that, how we get that 30 feet, we get that.
Okay,
Thank you,
thank you.
sir.
I
Thank you.
appreciate
Thanks,
you
Mark.
guys, everybody.
You want to hold on to this?
You want that
Yeah.
copy back?
Okay.
Okay, good.
Do you understand what,
Yeah,
we'll get you?
yeah, okay. I would appreciate it.
We'll write
Okay.
it all out.
That's what's probably.
No, you're okay. You don't have to stick around if you don't want to.
No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, next up on, we'll go ahead and the rest is new business. So I'm gonna go ahead and close the public portion of our discussion. Table with the chair. We will go ahead and close the public portion of the meeting, and I don't think we have any correspondence noted, so I will ask the mayor if you have a report for us this evening.
One thing I have over the weekend, we had interviews. We're going to hire 2 more full-time police officers. It was put in the budget by council this year, and we had interviews over the weekend. We will probably end up hiring those individuals in the next 4 to 6 weeks then to get them going. They were all, we interviewed 5, they were all internal candidates, and I'm going to pick 2 out of 5.
So if they're internal, are they currently
Part-time, yes,
Part-time or full?
yes,
Great.
that's all I
Thank you.
have.
Any questions for the mayor? If not, council representative report. Mr.
Yes,
Shaboo.
the PUD zoning that you approved to send to council, it's on for 3 readings. We had the first reading at the last meeting. And our zoning committee is working on 1244 else changes.
Great,
Nothing.
awesome. Any questions? Yep. All right, well, thank you. We'll go on to new business. There was, as, and Mr. Shaboo, please keep me honest here, because I'm going to go by the note that I had. But there was a request, I think, that came out of the council review of the PUD zoning about would we recommend that this was, right,
Over.
an over overlay or a rezoning of that particular parcel. I think that if I recall right, the way that the HUD is written, we kind of left that open. I know tonight we have Chris Hopkins with us again from CT to talk about what both of those mean. So if you wouldn't mind, maybe we could just start with, could you help us to understand kind of an overlay, maybe how that might be used versus rezoning?
Well, they are, whether you rezone to a specific plan use development standalone district, or you apply an overlay district, that is still a rezoning. You have to apply the district itself. So an overlay district, the main difference is that it's written so that the underlying district stays in effect. So you just are applying the PUD regulations over top, and that when it gets the way the way we had written it initially, at the time of rezoning, you would also the developer would also have the preliminary development plan approved simultaneously. So at the time of applying an overlay district, then what you're adopting at the same time the preliminary development plan, but the underlying district remains in place in the event that the approved preliminary plan doesn't move forward. So that what you're doing is you're preserving the existing conditions so that if the developer sells the property and a new owner doesn't want to do the PUD, then they still have the option to do the underlying.
Whatever the underlying was, without us having to go back and rezone it a second time.
Right, right. However, you know, if the developer sells it and the new developer doesn't want to do the PUD general development plan, then they would go through the same general development plan review process. And the way we had anticipated that is that it would go to the planning commission and then also to council for council's approval of the general development plan. Because the PUD text is so open-ended.
So the other question I guess I would have with an overlay is if we granted a piece of property, the HUD zone, HUD overlay, somebody builds in accordance, everything's approved, and we're 100 years from now, and it all gets torn down. Does it revert back to, do you grant an overlay kind of for purpose? So that if that purpose goes away, it would go back to the underlying zoning? That makes sense?
Well, again, you've adopted the general development plan. So the general development plan is really what's governing
Okay,
the development that you have agreed to rezone and approve the general development.
so if somebody plowed that under in 100 years,
Right.
then it would just revert back to what it was prior.
Right,
Because it does attach essentially to the development plan, or they are attached to each other. Got it, okay. Everybody else have any questions? That makes sense.
Well, It's the overlay zoning. It provides competing uses, which ultimately is good for the city. The more uses you have, generally, the bigger your market. And if everything holds with supply and demand, your higher values. Limit the use. The highest and best use assumes that use is applicable to the appropriate market. In response to your the scenario you just brought up, I'm a big believer in the economics. And certainly if in 50 years it was torn down and that old use economically was the most viable, yeah, you would be able to do that, but the economics should dictate that.
Yeah, but it would, if it wasn't, that person would then have the opportunity to do
Again, right. So whatever use economically is most beneficial or the highest will ultimately, right. It's when you exclude the use. And I think it was brought up before, you know, the possibility of businesses taking advantage of that corner. And that possibility exists, you know.
Well, and I think we also actually discussed the possibility of using the PUD approach. That's
Oh, in other locations, so,
potential. I don't want to,
yeah,
tie it too closely to one, and I also don't. wanna
yes,
think
I
that-
agree,
You know what I mean?
I agree.
But there's some flexibility then, if we don't just look at parcel by parcel, for this to really be a broader potential economic zone,
Now,
depending on what council may decide.
and, I'm sorry, Ms. Hopkins, you had mentioned that, okay, so if the developer sells it and the new developer does not want to, I think wouldn't there be a development agreement that would be, both developers would be obliged?
Well, yes, definitely, you could write that into the development agreement. That if he or she sells the property, it goes along, or the development plan stays.
Because I would think we, you know, the city would, and I don't want to speak for the city, but given my experience, I would think the city would not want, wouldn't want that commitment. They wouldn't want another developer to come in based on its previous approvals of a development. Decide, well, no, I don't want to do that.
Why not? What is the highest, the best economic use, isn't it? About that. Face of the thought that-
Oh, if it's not the PUD, well, then we'd have to revisit the entire
Right,
project.
right.
Oh,
But it
okay.
could easily
All right.
revert back to, okay,
Yes.
now we just.
Yeah.
Are at
And then I'm all for it.
zero, right?
I mean, options are good.
Yeah.
That makes
Um,
sense.
Mr. Chickering.
No,
Question.
I like what he said. I'd like having both. What happens if somebody else comes along and offers some business before we committed to this contractor? And it's a better deal, we could still do it. Basically what you're saying.
Competing offers or competing proposals are good.
Yes, that's all
Sorry.
I'm saying. But if
Yeah.
you limit it to the one, yeah, now I can understand. If you
Well,
limit
and
it
the
to
other
one.
piece is really about the way that the zoning, right? I mean, we
Yeah.
did a big refresh of the entire zoning, so now at least you are able to not give that up
Wow.
Right.
too, but allow for a.
And by the way, the same developer may choose the
Sure,
general
different.
plan versus the PUD, giving, you know, the,
You might want to give him the option.
Well, they would before they would come in.
Of
they're
course,
the
of
developer,
course,
so I would
but-
think they would
They
not
would
mind
not.
the option as well.
Mr. Sweeney, any thoughts?
Keep your options open.
Mr. Moore, any thoughts? Okay. So I am going to ask then just for a motion to make a recommendation back to council that what we would like to clarify is that we would recommend looking at this as an overlay as opposed to a rezoning. So HUD zoning becomes an overlay option.
I would like to point out, what I did ask Mayor, if it made sense for me to draft any recommended language. And so in order to make it an overlay district, you would need to amend or make
Okay.
changes to the proposed text. So if you want, I can.
Yes, please.
Oh, please.
It's
Well,
like
could
you
I
read
ask
our
a
minds.
question? And I meant
Certainly.
to ask it before. Who are you representing in all of this?
You, the city,
You, the city.
the city.
Oh,
CT is,
yes.
the engineer.
Oh, well, you know, developers hire CT. I've hired them before as well.
Oh, no, in this case.
No, in this
In this case,
That was not pointed out earlier.
Sorry,
So,
thank you for that. clarification. Yeah, CT represents city engineer.
and hopefully that doesn't matter, right? It's a win-win.
Right.
And Chris, this just revises the current one that we have.
That's correct, and I did show the changes with the underline and strike through. So what is new is, there's a new section.
We do have a
02.
few extra copies if anybody else. wants.
I think you might have about 10 there, so
There are
there
one or two extras. So we're really looking at 125502. The addition of a 125502 is probably a renumbering then if we go through that.
Well, I
as
did,
well.
I made the changes, but, yeah, the renumbering does not show as a change. And by adding, section 1255.02, it did make sense to delete on the back page, on page 6. Sub-item E, where it talks about the concurrent zoning amendment review, because that's encompassed in this new 1255.02.
Okay, so let's go ahead and take a moment at least to read through what Ms. Hopkins has proposed in a little bit of detail since we're just seeing it for the first time. So it would be to designate the overlay district with a bit of a definition under A. It establishes a development option with the requirements that are in addition to those of the base or conventional zoning district. It gives property owners the ability of developing according to the PUD, the PUD regulations, while retaining the base. And then it would be done essentially through zoning amendments is what this says. And if you continue to read, then section 2 says that application for that amendment would come here and then be referred to the city council for final approval. C would be the designation of an official zoning map with the approval of the overlay district. It would be superimposed. So again, the idea of overlay, the existing base. The effect, which is section D, effective rezoning to the PUD overlay district. Once it has been approved, the overlay district and the preliminary development plan. So those are concurrently approved. I think, Chris, this gets to your point earlier. The uses are replaced by this process as a continuing land use. And then 2D talks about the base zoning district remains undisturbed and regulates future use except as provided. So I think we learned to do anything. It's different than was already agreed to in the PUD and the development plan. That would not be allowed unless it was allowed in the base. And then again, just by way of quick review, we would remove the section that said concurrent zoning amendment review, because we wouldn't have concurrent zoning. Okay, Mr. Moore, you're on. Just want to make sure I got through all the changes.
No, I'm
Did you
good.
have a question?
I didn't.
Okay. All right, with that, then, any other questions of Ms. Hopkins? If not, then I will entertain a motion to put this amendment, which recommends the use of PUD as an overlay district. And therefore, I recommend that we would be proving that we would recommend this to City Council for further review. Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Thank you. And Mr. Mayor, could you call the roll
Sure.
for us?
Ms. Casey,
Aye.
Mr. Shaboo,
Aye.
Mr. Sweeney.
Aye.
Mr. Moore.
Aye.
Mr. Busher.
Thank you.
Yes.
And as always, thank you, Chris.
I want to thank you for having back on that.
You're welcome.
Great work.
All right, I do believe we have had the Summers group on. I don't think there's anybody here this evening. Is that correct?
Correct, yes. They're still working on the engineering, like
So we will,
For which,
Lake Shore and Andrews.
we will table that until these materials. MS Properties, Mitchell. Kaplan.
Katie's here with a couple other representatives.
Great, and if you guys could introduce yourselves and
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Katie Weber. I am MSP Properties Local Land Use Council. I'm an attorney at Answer Gavin, and we have a couple representatives from MSP here tonight. Unfortunately, Mitchell had a little bit of a family emergency pop up, but if you want to introduce yourselves as well.
Yeah, sure. Good evening, Mayor. It's good to see you again, sir. My name is Brandon McFarlane. I'm Mitchell Patrick's in-house counsel. We work with him out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
I'm Anthony. I do the project management for Mitchell's construction. We do our own general contract, so I handle that stuff.
Great. And Anthony, what's your last name?
Omarosa.
So I'll let them get into specifics, but I'll kick us off here for why we're here today. So thank you for having us today. The property we're talking about is at 5768 Andrews Road, which is currently if you don't know quite where it is, I believe that there's currently a church on that property, and MSP Development is currently under contract in order to purchase that property.
And that's the Orthodox Church.
Yes,
Right.
Correct.
Right there on the website.
Just for clarification.
So I will pass out these, so maybe if you want, there should be enough copies. for
You guys can
everybody
come
to
up
have
with
one. Just to kind of give us
Pretty
a general
informal.
layout of what we're looking at.
Yeah, we're pretty informed.
Okay, all right, so there you go. So what we're presenting here is MSP Properties is a preferred developer for Dollar General,
Throw that in there.
as well as a handful of other companies out there. And so what he is proposing is on the front half of his property, as you see, is to put in a Dollar General store. The current plan as it sits right now is completely code compliant, fits into the zoning. This is zoned B1, well, I think a local business district 1, if you will. So it's fully in compliance, and he's put these plans together to be fully in compliance with your zoning code. So since the size of this parcel is more than what's needed for a Dollar General store, what he's proposing to do on the back half of the parcel, which would eventually get split, is to do a residential development. And he's looking to do apartments.
That's your townhouses.
Apartments, but they're gonna have a townhousey feel, if you will. So each unit, so these will be for rent apartments that are kind of more set up instead of the traditional apartment buildings, that have more of townhouse characteristics, if you will. And I can pass these are renderings that give you plans for the entire apartment piece of this. So if you wanna, they're all put together, there should be 7 or 8 pages, but it'll give you not only a rendering, but also to be able to see floor plans inside as well. And so the challenge that we have with this parcel is, as you know, residential development is not currently permitted in the zoning category. So we wanted to kind of, well, there is residential development if it's age restricted is currently permitted in this zoning category. But you know, we think for the city as well as for the developer, not age restricting these apartments would be a better, more beneficial development. So we wanted to come in with this plan and I'll let these boys kind of take it from here to walk you through exactly what they're looking for this apartment piece.
Yeah, sure. So just kind of touching on Katie's comment about the age restrictions. The units that you see here, they are 2-story units. The bulk of the living space is going to be on the 2nd floor. They do offer garages on the 1st floor, and as well as the ability for the tenants to have their trash taken care of. That part we're still working out. But as I said, the bulk of the living space is actually on the 2nd floor, and these are 3 bedroom units, and so they're more suited actually for smaller family size folks there. As she mentioned, they'll essentially be behind the Dollar General again for 2 reasons. 1, because the parcel itself is larger than is necessary for the Dollar General, but 2, most commercial space, commercial type businesses are not going to place themselves off of the road behind another commercial unit. So it just makes sense to be able to use the remainder of that parcel for some sort of a development such as this. Ma'am, as you had mentioned earlier, that is the church down there on the left. If you notice though, around that church, there are a lot of different residential type developments there. There are some that are similar to that. They are 2 stories. There are some single family units back behind, And then across the street, there are some multiple floor, but essentially single floor apartment buildings. So this is kind of a good mixture between all of the different types of developments that are around that area. The placards that you have in front of you, they kind of show some renderings of essentially more or less what it would look like, kind of the general feel or style that we're going with, which is a good kind of medium from what's already there. And then the available building materials today, as many of you know, I'm sure, supply chain difficulties and whatnot. Certain building materials are difficult to get. So these are basically renderings based on what we know for certain is going to be available and that we'll be able to actually use. Are there any specific questions that we could answer?
So I have a couple,
Yes, ma'am.
just to start some things off.
Me too.
Let me start with one easy one and then I'll let it go. What's your current thought on the number of units? Does this accurately kind of represent if I were to count them up?
Yes,
The number of
absolutely.
units? You know what that number is? Or
13,
13.
4.8333 per acre.
13? But I'm glad I. Looks like a lot.
There's only 13 total, right?
But it's good, yeah.
Mr. Busher, did you have questions? you wanted to-
Well, yeah. I get it. Did you confer with the city engineer or anybody relative to the general plan in tying this into Anna Court, which is a dead end street that what's up to the backside of this parcel? I would think it's certainly in the city's interest to tie the traffic into that.
No, we haven't. At this point, we're in very preliminary stages. We wanted to bring this in.
Sure.
And you know that you're in the process of kind of taking a look at your zoning code and
Right.
where it is that you want to go. So we thought that it would be good to put this plan in front of you to see, what it is that the developer is thinking of doing, to see if this would then work in with what your plan overall for the city would be.
Right.
As well as what path in terms of zoning we should go down. And I think that the developer here is really open to seeing what does the city want to see here? What does the city have plans for in terms of moving forward? I guess overall, is this something that fits into the general plan that you would see in terms of the city? So I think that, as we kind of move forward in this process, we'd be very open to having those conversations, but at this point, no, we haven't brought this in front of an engineer. We know that, our clients, architects and engineers have taken a look at it and know that the commercial part, we wanted to make sure that we were able to fully comply with your zoning code and kind of go from there.
So, I mean, I think before we would look, I get this is our first cut of this, but obviously we need to see all the environmental impact, which I think for me is probably just looking at this, one of the concerns, right? We would look at having the retail. Yes, it's within the zone, but I have to say personally, don't throw me, but the law says, so if we go by, to extend that residential, it feels like flopping a retail in the middle of a residential piece that's already been decided by zoning. But we would need to see that full environmental impact, I think, and especially because, we would be looking at over 13 units, potentially 4 people per unit, kind of, I'd have to do all the math with the bedrooms and things like that, but that's a pretty big.
Yes, ma'am. We're currently actually undergoing our phase 1 ESA and our geotech. So when we do get those finished, we'll definitely forward them to you as well.
Right, that would be good.
Well, my first, having been out to the site, which I was the setback specifically to the rear. butting up against single family detached is quite minimal. Certainly that last unit of the fourplex, you know, I would look, if there were no other objections to, you know, make that a threeplex just for that purpose, but then having gone out there, certainly the general plan anticipated Anna Court going into there because there's no cul-de-sac, which would have been a requirement of the plan. For emergency services, school bus turnaround, garbage truck turnaround. That's why I say it's really to the benefit of services as well as emergency services. They have an additional. The other thing that I
Do we
am,
know if we don't know yet? Maybe that's
Go
a
on.
question, right? Do we know if Anna Court abuts this property?
Yes.
It does.
Okay, it does when it comes over there. Sorry, I'm just looking at Google Maps.
and actually the residents on Anna use that parking lot. You know,
So the answer is yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Here's the other thing, which is really kind of a heads up to what we're going through on PUD as well, is this elevation.
So that's
Is-
the front elevation.
Yeah, that's great, but we would hold you to that.
Mhm.
Meaning the cottage style garage doors with the glass. Those tend to be a bit more pricey than your standard, right? So the specs that are being proposed certainly are the specs that we would anticipate being provided.
Yes, sir.
Instead of drawing that back, standing seam, metal roof, you know, the vertical siding, it's all good. But we would just expect that to be followed through.
So the developer intends to keep the property, sir. We don't tell them
Oh,
like they
okay.
sell afterwards. So it's actually in our best interest as well for it to be as aesthetically
Sure.
appealing as possible. So
And then the other thing is the market, I'm sorry, the family orientation, the lack of green space.
So actually, I apologize. There is actually green space behind each of the units. It's not, a huge,
Right.
backyard, but all of the apartments do have some green space behind them as well as a driveway in front of them. And that will be something that will be maintained by the owner as well.
And I will give you that. I mean, there's a wooded kind of a buffer
Mhm.
zone. Yeah, I'll give you
And would
that.
there be a buffer on both sides? Is that considered yet?
When you mean both sides, ma'am, can you point
Well,
to?
sorry, the north and the south side, in that I see that you have a buffer proposed
Yeah.
on
So
the,
this portion right
this
here, all of this around here is actually currently buffered.
okay, and
this
you would
is,
retain it.
yes, for the most
Okay.
part, is that. It will be trimmed as necessary. You see some of the buffer goes.
Yeah, it's
Some of
pretty
the-
overgrown.
Some of the space there, but basically all
The
outside
thought
of
is-
the line right here, that buffer would actually. still-
Okay, great, thank you.
And I think you, when we talked, cut back on the parking spaces for the Dollar General because those were
Yes, because when.
to
we-
add more green
Yeah,
space.
when we initially had put the plan together, we wanted to make sure that we had all the parking spaces as required by your code. But that turned out to be a lot of parking spaces for a Dollar General, which it's not a high traffic generator business. It's really, convenience store or local, general store, if you will, for people to stop in and out. You're not gonna have 20 cars in at a time. You usually only have a couple at a time as people are stopping in. So in order to create some more green space and buffering, we removed some of those parking spaces to make it have a little bit nicer of a flow.
The other thing I do think we want to see, and that probably goes closer to the environmental, would be especially up front for the planting
Yes,
and
ma'am.
the landscaping.
Sure. We do have some renderings of what that would look like if you're interested in seeing that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, so this is what the Dollar General component would,
Is that similar to the one that's
There
on
should be
Lake
enough
Shore
time to
Boulevard?
show
in
it.
Greenwich
I'm sure
right now?
it would be.
It looks externally like it, do you know?
I'm not familiar with that particular
I'm
store.
not sure that's all.
So I will say that, we have represented MSB properties in a handful of developments like this. And I'll say, I think that Mitchell and his team make the nicest Dollar Generals I've seen. He really puts emphasis on making sure that he's using high quality materials.
Oh, so this isn't a standard Dollar General.
No, and he's really actually, obviously,
Okay.
everything has to be signed off by Dollar General, but as a preferred developer, what he does is he comes in and develops the property and then leases it to Dollar General on a triple net lease. But he retains ownership, and part of his business model is hanging on to his properties, so he can make sure that maintenance is maintained and moving forward. In the event that Dollar General ceases to be his tenant, he wants to make sure that he has a high quality building moving forward that can be used for another retail use.
And do you
So he
know
does
where
focus
in
on-
the Northeast Ohio location there, where Wellsweek we might have a Dollar General?
Oh,
today?
you know, I can't give you one that is currently built,
Okay.
because they're currently in production, but once he gets one up, I can let you know.
That would be great if you could
Um,
let the mayor know that.
We have several, we have about 20 that we're building this year alone, and
Okay.
and another 20 or so that we currently operate throughout Pennsylvania. We have one in West Virginia, a couple in Ohio, Minnesota, and several here in Ohio. One of the one that we actually have going on right now is in Lima, Ohio. That one's being built currently. We have one out in Trainer, Ohio, that's being built, Trainer, Iowa, excuse me, it's being built right now. And just in and around Pittsburgh, we've got 4 that we're building in Johnstown, McKees Rocks. Youngstown, Ohio is another one that we're building as well. So
So
a lot of these are in
It
the
is
process.
interesting to me. I didn't realize there was a corporate piece. But I guess then the question that I have is, when do you hit saturation, as I think we probably already have 3 Dollar Generals within 5 miles of here.
No, absolutely. So I can tell you from, as you know, we're not here on behalf of Dollar General Corporate, but I can tell you from their business plan, really who they try to market to is the convenience type. So you want to be placing them in close distance to residential, as well as they found that they get a lot of walk-up business as well. Whether or not, you know, taking the dog around the block, or you want to run up for some milk, or, you know, bring the kids out, they definitely get a lot of walkable business. So that's how they found that they can put them, you know, closer together, because they found that their general customer, you're not driving 20 minutes to go to Dollar General. You're going to Dollar General because it's right up around the corner. Exactly. So they have really sophisticated, you know, market data and software in order to pinpoint. And when they're working with their preferred developers, they've already given them the numbers. You know, this is a market that can handle another Dollar General, or, you know, you need to be looking at, and they really kind of get it pretty close, you know, square mileage is to where it is that they need to be looking, so they're not competing with their other stores.
Yeah, just a caveat, they tell us where they would like to put a building. We don't buy a site and say, hey, we think this might be good. So there's a list that is basically published every year to the preferred developers first. They choose the areas and the regions that they want to try and address, and then it goes to the regular developers after that. And so this location is basically on a list of areas that Dollar General has identified that they'd like to put a certain number of stores if they haven't already.
I would agree with your assessment of market local foot traffic. I think the one on Lake Shore might be struggling a bit because of all of the residences across Lake Shore. That market tends to get in their vehicles to go. In this city, there is a lot of
Well,
foot traffic and residences without cars.
and there's a lot of Dollar General type stores. We have Marks, we have Family Dollar, we have
Sure.
another one over there, so. Just had a writing roll up.
And this isn't, you know, when we look at the other stores, everything's $1 in here. This is not that same.
No, this is Dollar General.
This
No,
is
Different. That's
more
not a Dollar General.
convenience. I could get milk, I could get bread,
Correct. They're-
not, you know,
Yeah,
Okay.
and Dollar General in the past couple of years has actually really grown past the stereotype of the very cheap kind of crappy dollar store. So there's a lot of home-related goods that you can get, simple things ranging from frozen foods to some fresh food stores that we have, to a coat hanger if you wanted to get that. laundry items, et cetera. So it's definitely kind of more of a holistic store.
Mr. Shaboo or Mr.
Yeah.
Sweeney?
I just have a question. What, instead of 13, what if we said that that's too much in that area? That maybe 10 units would be better? Would that be a monkey wrench into this?
It's something that we can go back and check. The number that we put there now is essentially based on a couple of factors. One is the available square footage. Two, again, our pro forma analysis of the rents that we could get in exchange for how much it's going to cost us to develop that. So that baker's dozen number is kind of what we've come on. If we did have to reduce the number of units, more than likely it would probably change the layout or even the size or the types of units. We just have to go back to our architect.
You might make them bigger.
That I can't answer. We'd have to talk to the architect about that. But it's something that we can look at. Was there a particular number that you had in mind?
No, I was just asking generally.
Sure.
And is this whole project, is it, if council agreed to the store but not the, how would that?
More than likely, we would still build the stores or even without the apartments. But yeah, as we mentioned, you just have a giant lot in the middle of nowhere that's not meeting its highest and best use. So
I agree, but I'm just.
No, because
throwing
as,
out-
because as we kind of kicked off, this is a larger parcel than that they like the location and the property. And so in trying to kind of come up with, well, what's going to be a good use that would complement Dollar General as well as the other uses that are around this property, that's where they kind of went down the direction of doing a residential development. We could, to put in a strip center, probably, I'm just gonna assume that that's not really where you're looking to go with this property.
Yeah, my only concern was how much space.
here's what I would
It's
say.
fine, it's fine. I mean, that would be good.
Here's another thing that I would say. So I'm kind of doing our market research for the area. We actually did call a lot and visit a lot of the apartment complexes surrounding them. We asked them, hey, what are you renting? What's your rent time? And the vast majority of them said, we have a wait list for 6 or 7 months. Like, you couldn't get in here if you wanted to. So, 13 might not be, solving the housing crisis or anything like that, but it is certainly addressing a need that we've identified exists, just because the number of new, healthy, safe, houses or rental units, it's few and far in between. I mean, everyone's kind of feeling that crunch there.
So
So
it seems like these are probably bigger than most of what we
yes,
have.
yes, ma'am.
Pretty rare to get beyond the 2 bedrooms, let alone an up down.
And honestly, this is more conducive. People,
Well, PUDs are like front.
I know, but you've got a, let's see, conforming use of the front,
Mhm.
not so front and center on that back parcel. And what do you do with that back parcel? You don't need all that space.
How big is the full parcel? 4
This
acres?
2.69 acres.
Well, that's
Thank
the
you.
back, that's the
That's
residential,
the-
that's 269.
Oh, plus 1.15, so
right.
it's 3,
It's a big
almost
lot.
4. It's 4 acres.
It's a big.
And as Katie pointed out, everything that's in the plan now conforms to all of our
Current.
current. Right.
Exactly, and the residential piece, I think that, we're looking for some guidance as well, and, is this a plan that there's an appetite for that, you can see moving forward, and then from there, I think we're looking for guidance from the city of whether or not to rezone it or to go the direction of the PUD.
With an overlay kind of the
Well,
situation that we
what's
just
the rest of the
discussed.
board's thought on Antport?
I'm not sure if that's, but with what they're necessarily looking to do, although I think it is an interesting question that it would be nice to have our emergency services weigh in on what their thought might be. I think that was a great point, Mr. Busher, that on the other hand, this particular, if I look at where it is and where Antport ends, it doesn't
And it's also a very narrow road.
That's what I
Two-way
would-
traffic down there is gonna
Would be a
headache,
problem.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
So
very
I don't
narrow.
recommend connecting.
Well,
That's my
Location you
opinion.
mentioned, Lima,
Lima, Ohio, yes, sir.
are they currently in construction?
Yes, we've already started the ground construction on that, the earth moving, and so we expect to start putting up the building here.
Typically the same.
Yes, they're almost exactly carbon copies of one another. We basically have two basic stores. We have a small one and a big one. And it just depends on the lot and zoning on which one we put in there. But for the most part, the differences between stores really fall with the municipality's zoning code, things like parking setbacks, elevation and kind of flood zoning, stuff like that.
Is there one farther on, like getting ready to open, or are we still all in the building?
So Trainer Iowa is like the one that's, the metal building is up, the masonry wall is up. We're probably 2 weeks away from opening. It's in Trainer, Iowa. Like.
If you're going out there.
So we can put together maybe a package of some projects that they've done. So you
Yeah,
can
that'd be
see-
interesting.
Because it's, it's one thing to look at a beautiful rendering, but you want to see, well, what does this actually look like once it's built?
Once some.
We can see if we can send you over some
Yeah,
examples.
we have.
And it's hard to come up, I'm sure. just off the top
We
of
have
my head.
brochures and like a portfolio of all the buildings we built. I mean, this is what we do day in and day out at Dollar General's. So the one in Lima, Shawnee Township, we're doing the site work right now. I don't know how far, probably a couple hours from here, I'd say. Lima, Ohio is. So we're just in the site work. We do our own site work. They're our own people, so we have our own machinery, excavators, bulldozers.
So you do your own construction?
Yes.
You don't go outside?
We GC it ourselves.
Okay.
So that's why we take big pride, make sure it looks top to the line. And we're very hands-on, so.
So just to confirm, your approach, if I think of it overall, is, assuming we go ahead and move forward, you'll come back to us with the development plan for the Dollar General, for the retail piece first, correct? And then we split the lot?
Yes, so the lot
At the
is
same
going to
time,
be
okay.
split. Yes, ma'am. We're gonna have one parcel just for the residential portion and one parcel just for the commercial portion.
Okay, and then we kind of proceed in a parallel track there.
Mhm.
What is your current, knowing how everything is today, what's your current sense of timing?
So
If all goes really well and there's not a problem.
So if we, didn't leave a bad impression, ideally, right? The Dollar General, we're actually planning on constructing that this year.
Okay,
They do go up relatively quickly, kind of once we get all the initial permitting and all the due diligence up front done, they'll go up in a matter of months. So that's ideally the plan, is that we'll actually have this done by the end of the year. The residential apartments, again, best case scenario, we will start on them next year.
So you're looking at 2 to 3 years.
Demo,
Approximately, yes. sir.
demolition of the existing.
Yeah, that building will be demolished for the Dollar General to be built. Again, that happens relatively quickly. So.
and does that take up, I don't know, sorry, I tend to be pretty
It's okay.
spatially. So would the Dollar General essentially take up where the church is today and kind of?
It's a
Yeah.
big setback, yeah, that's. big.
Oh, no, wait, now I'm
Quite a
looking, now that I can see the screen behind
Oh,
it,
yeah.
it's about half the church-ish.
Yes.
Okay.
There's
Because
a
I'm
front-
guessing this is to scale. if I
Yes,
really
yes, ma'am,
see
that is correct.
The shadow at the back, okay.
Well, I guess my biggest suggestion is that last one. So we need to-
That maybe
Residential.
not having enough of a setback.
Yeah, your single family detail, I don't think that owner would appreciate it, but,
I
Just
think
putting
we're
myself-
looking at, is that a,
That's on the north side, right?
That's
no,
on the-
it's on the west side.
No, it's on the west side.
Northwest.
It's the furthest
Yes,
west
northwest.
of the
Northwest.
fourplex. There's only one fourplex. All the others are threeplexes.
But I think that's, is that a?
Because it looks
10-foot
like a
setback?
10-foot setback.
Well, it says it's a 10 foot, yeah.
But he already said it, there was one unit less. It's not gonna throw this out.
Yeah, I don't think one unit might be, a few units maybe, but it's something that we
Well,
can.
a few units is. No, I think it's a good, overall, it's a nice approach to parcel.
Yes.
Again, I want to see the economic impact. That's probably my biggest piece and, of course, the impact on the city itself and our city services and safety forces, things like that. Those are the things that come up to me, that clearly the front is as was intended, so. It's surrounded right now by, well, on the one side anyway, by other rental.
Normandy isn't it?
This would be, clearly, if we stick with whatever we would see, something like this is to me a very nice place. It seems to have some green space here, so that's always a good
You would
sign.
get traffic. There would be traffic in this store.
Well, definitely the folks who would live in the units behind it. would frequent
Yeah,
the store,
I
definitely.
guess.
The units behind it.
13
Yeah,
But you have
families.
units on each side.
There's actually, if you don't count the road, there's actually units that would surround the entire building. So,
Yes, there is. And they would come there.
That's it.
Anyone else have any sense of what you're thinking or concerns you might have that they might be able to away, consider and bring back? Mr. Sweeney, Mr. Moore?
Well, I agree with Mr. Busher. If we could eliminate that last building, that 13th one.
Mhm.
I
I'll
think
meet you halfway in accord for that one.
take a view.
Because
Yeah, last
as
year-
is, there'll just be one way in and out of the units through the parking lot at Dollar.
Yeah, I didn't
Dollar
see
General.
that before. I see that now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you say Anna Court, you mean that road that
Yeah,
abuts the
yeah,
parcel?
yeah,
Little-
yeah,
yeah.
I
You're
don't know if
interested
you
in
can see
connecting
it on
that
this.
to.
Yeah, it's right
Right,
here.
yep.
This little shadow
Sure.
that you see, and it's a very narrow, so these are the.
Yeah,
old
it's very
cottages,
narrow.
and
Yeah,
it's
So you basically like to take this road and connect it into our road around.
He
Yeah, he would.
I don't like dead ends. I mean, a cul-de-sac would be ideal, but
The
I
only
don't
problem
know.
is that street is too narrow.
they're all narrow.
No, you're talking 10, 12 foot.
I mean, it's.
Well-
We're not talking
You can't
like a-
Yeah, I mean,
If you
it's,
have it in-
we're not
Right.
gonna get anywhere on that, so that's, it was just an
He's ready to
observation.
give it
It was a good observation. Yeah, it was something.
Any other questions for us or immediate input? If not, thank you very much. Really
Yes.
appreciate
Very nice, Claire.
your presentation and your willingness, as well as Emma's property's willingness to consider.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments that we might have? I'm sure the mayor could pass them along. So we will
Yes, that
also.
would be wonderful. So we will, hear from you on how, you'd like to, in terms of putting a formal application together, and really getting into the.
Yeah, I mean, I think our next step then would be the review of the development plan and then the zoning proposals.
Right.
So
Basements, right?
I don't believe so, no.
I don't think.
Keep pushing.
Well,
But there
there are
is-
apartments that have a garage and a second floor. and
Right, there's a
whole-
garage.
There's,
That's
there's
a
actually-
conversation I just had.
There's actually a driveway as well that you can actually not only put your vehicle in the garage, but you can have another vehicle in front of that garage as well.
But you don't want a basement there. You go down a foot.
Which is a
Water.
question, is there there is a guest parking beyond your driveway?
Beyond the driveway, no, ma'am.
Okay. Is this green space in between these buildings?
Yes.
All right, thank you
Yeah,
very much.
thank
you.
All right,
Thank you.
Thank you.
guys.
Appreciate your guys'
You guys,
joining us.
you guys want to keep these here to look at, or?
Mr. Mayor, that's up to
You can
you.
speak,
Because
we
they're
have
nice
tons
big
of
blow
them.
ups and everything. that
Yeah.
you-
Sure.
Okay, sure.
Perfect.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Frame up. Council meeting, council meeting. All right, I think that was. Tabled that. I think that was it in our agenda, unless there's any other business that we have missed.
No, you're all set.
Okay, so our next meeting is scheduled for the 2nd of May. Again, as always, assuming that we have agenda items, but it seems like we might. We had a few things that will be carried over. But again, seems like we might. So with that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second,
I'll second.
all in favor, we'll do this by acclamation. Please signify by saying aye. Aye, opposed, and abstain. All right, thank you. We will see you next month.
Thank you, guys.
Copy of the ordinance? Sure,
Yeah.
No, I know that, but I don't want to do it now.
Oh.
All right.
Stop video.
Good, that's it.
That's it.
It's still recording, so you've got to do.
Nothing, I know.